always a bit of a project to anticipate coming to a new place and wondering who the hearers might be. And I will advise you at the outset that I had in my mind the whole generation of young people in the land who are seeking about for a way to go forward confidently. Young people much as you were at one time in your life, no doubt, looking forward. At this present moment, you may be sort of looking at the present and wondering about the future. Well, I titled my talk At the Crossroad, and the crossroad is a place of decision. The image I had in my mind in preparing for this morning was a tradition from the blues. I'm not sure if you folks are familiar with blues as a form of music. It's a form that I particularly like. The equivalent in the Bible would be the book of Lamentations. That is to say, what do you do when life is really on your case? Life has got you down. There doesn't seem to be a present that's enjoyable for you, and the idea of a future seems completely obscure. The blues are a little bit about that. They're generally composed by persons living at the very edge of solvency, not sure if today is the first day of the rest of your life or the last day. The blues is about being sad and not being ashamed of it and singing out, trusting that in that singing, life will be stirred up again. And it isn't it the case, those of you who have some experience with the blues or other kinds of music, that a good tune in a good moment can lift your spirits. The blues had a way of lifting people's spirits in hard times. And I think that qualifies them in some sense to be ambassadors of good news. But in the blues tradition, there's a mythology. And it generally involves a young person of talent, maybe a young girl singer or a young boy guitar player or harmonica player or saxophone player. Somebody with talent. And they've struggled with that talent. They've tried to invest it well, but it hasn't come to much. All it seems to be is standing out there alone in the rain singing sad songs. And in this mythology of the blues, there is a person who comes to a crossroads. And in that crossroads moment, the person says, what do I do now? I've got a talent, I've got an ability, I've got a gift, but it's going nowhere. And there's a discouragement in the artist at that moment. And in the mythology, all of a sudden a big black Cadillac comes swooping down the road, screeches to a halt in a cloud of dust, and a man jumps out with a suit and a big cigar and says, "Sonny, are you looking for a ride?" And then the offer is made. If you will sign on with me, I'll make you a star. I'll make you famous. I'll make you wealthy. I'll give you what you've been dreaming about all these years and you just thought might never happen. And of course the test is, will the young artist sign or not? And that's how it is. That's a Bible story. There's two cases that I could point to let you know that what I'm saying is so. One is in the Garden of Eden, where the human beings, Adam and Eve, are enjoying the good creation of God, and somebody comes along and says, "Are you really happy here? Wouldn't you be happier if you ate that tree over there? Come on, sign up with me." And of course, the folks take the temptation, and away they go down the whole adventure of human history with all of its joys and all of its sorrows. The second is very much like the first. It's when Jesus is getting ready to do his piece of work that God has given him, and he's off in the desert getting himself ready, and that same tempting voice comes and says, "Say, boy, I've noticed, I've been watching, you got talent with people. You know how to tell a story. You know how to raise a dead guy. I mean, that's a talent, right? Sign on with me, and I'll give you everything you ever dreamed of." And in that story, Jesus says, "No, thank you very much." In the gospel today, we have Jesus with a group of people who are curious about him, who are interested in him, who have in some sense been following his way from village to village, sharing the good news about God's coming kingdom. And on this particular day, Jesus announces that there may be more to the project that they had been thinking about. It's nice to imagine a Jesus who invites us to the good life and expects very little of us. And of course, that's how it is in the beginning, isn't it? As it would be with a child. With a child, you don't expect a whole lot. But as the child begins to grow, say at about adolescence, Mom and Dad begin to expect something. So Jesus has been hinting and suggesting that something big is coming up, but he hasn't been clear about it. But in today's text, we get some clues, because he starts speaking about those who will and those who won't, those who will choose to go this way or those who will choose to go that way. And I'd like you to be very, very clear that I can find no trace of incrimination. I can find no trace of Jesus pointing the fingers and says, you folks who come with me are the winners, and you folks who don't come with me are the losers. He's simply saying you have a choice. And there's no shame attributed to the persons who choose not to come along further down the way. So there's Jesus with a small group of persons, those who continue with him, and Jesus is getting ready to get them to learn how to be effective in the way of the kingdom. Sometimes we feel that we need a great crowd of people to be effective. This story is about Jesus narrowing it out and looking for those who are prepared to make the commitment, those who are prepared to go the distance. And even among them, there's one who doesn't quite have what it takes. But again, not a word of incrimination, not a word of accusation from Jesus about the choice that we make. We simply live with the consequences as did those folks. Now I'd like to say a little bit about the choice that I think Jesus is presenting those folks. And the choice is based on the two texts, the one from Joshua and the one from the book of Kings. And the Joshua story and the King's story belong together in the same way that the capital letter is at the front of the sentence and the period is at the end. They mark a passage of time in the history of people when things have progressed to a certain state. I'd like to speak about the Joshua text a bit by drawing on our memories of Canada being a new country and being settled by a generation, some of whom may be connected with you. You may have among your ancestors persons who first came to this land. But at the very least, most of you will remember how it was in the very earliest days. How there was a sense of promise, a sense of expectation, a sense of hope that Canada was going to allow us to be a people who were devoted to liberty and loving kindness and neighborliness and the sharing of the commonwealth produced by our shared labors. Canada was optimistic in those early days, and the people of Canada were optimistic. That's how it was in that Joshua text. A whole group of people had left one place which had become oppressive to them. They had left there seeking another place which would be hospitable to them. How many of the folks who first came to this country didn't come to sort of break free of some of the, what can I say, devilish things that were going on in Europe at the time? People were discouraged and disappointed with the way of things, and they were looking towards something new. And Canada seemed to offer them that promise. So Joshua gives us a people who have come into a land who are hopeful and determined to live out the way that God has revealed to them. They are determined not to slip back into the ways of Egypt from which they had been set free, liberated as it were. So those people say to Joshua, we'll do anything to keep faith with God because we know God is the one who has set us free from the house of bondage. We will do anything. And they make a covenant together. They promise that they will follow the ways of God. And those of you who are very familiar with the biblical story, who have been exposed to the lectionary for many years, who have heard the passages over and over, will know that from the Joshua time to the Solomon time, there is a change that happens. And by the time we are at Solomon's temple, the house that he built for God, we recognize through the history of the monarchy that things have not gone the way people in the covenant of Joshua had hoped that they would. So we might think of ourselves that things haven't turned out quite the way we thought that they might. Now the Solomon text is an important text for us because it represents what happens when people turn away from God even while keeping the traditions of their religion. So Solomon has inaugurated a temple, and inside that temple is the holy box, the Ark of the Covenant, which brings back the memory of Exodus, which brings back the memory of liberation. But now it's inside of a closed place with a series of doors and a whole retinue, a whole gathering of priests and other functionaries to protect God from any kind of messy business. Well, the exact opposite happens. The God who was free, the God who had power to liberate and bring people out of their bondage and into a new experience, is now closed in and used to serve the interests of the king. When Solomon's day is at its peak, the Bible speaks of the amazing achievements of the man. There was more gold than anywhere. There was more silver. There was more brass. There were more horses. There were more camels. It was an abundance of material blessing under Solomon's jurisdiction. But faithfulness to God was in deep decline. And one of the first indications of that is the realization that Solomon's plan for building these great temples and cities and houses involved what we call taxation and conscripted labor. So Solomon's house actually drew the people of God back into a system of debt bondage. Their lives were lived in servitude to what is called by theologians the royal agenda. Now, what does all of this have to do with us here today? Well, the main thing is we recognize from these two stories that there are two directions that we can set for ourselves. One is the direction of the house of God, and the other is the direction of the people of God. So as we come to this place in our history where our houses are in jeopardy, we're not sure anymore if we can keep them because we don't have the resources or the energy, our populations aren't being replenished, and we think, oh no, we are going to lose our houses. But the Joshua story makes it clear that what is required of a people who live in relationship with God and one another is not a house. It's a decision to be a good neighbor. It's the decision to be a person who develops the inner gifts and expresses them in a life of loving service. Seeing all the ladies present here today, and with apologies to the gentlemen, if we just think of the churches, the Anglican Church, the United Church, and others as well, how many of their economic foundations weren't established by the work of their women's auxiliaries? The UCW I'm familiar with. I'm not sure what the name would be in the Anglican. Say it?
ACW and UCW.
ACW, Anglican Church. Thank you. So these women's organizations, but what they represented was that quiet, patient, persistent doing of small good things to make a big difference. So I'm going to ask you, as my concluding remarks, to make a decision inside of your own mind, to put a test in front of you, which you can choose or not choose without recrimination or judgment. I'm going to encourage you to ask yourself, can I be a better neighbor? Can I be a better friend? Can I be a better person in all of my relations? Can I do things a little bit differently so that my life is given to supporting people and relationships rather than buildings and contracts and obligations? That we begin to let go a little bit of that material sign of God's blessing and move more towards the spiritual side of the presence of God within us, that we may trust as we go about our daily lives with what I'm going to call, as my last word, a Jesus smile. May you choose to bear Jesus' smile into all of your relationships.